mental stress. It can come from, physical stress and things like that. So that's definitely something that we're gonna re-emphasize today, and we are also going to learn how to cope with these things now. So yesterday I gave you the activity of going over where those stressors are coming from. I had you go over that stress wheel. And then I had you also talk about, or kind of evaluate, whether or not you have control over those things. So I'm going to dive right into it today. I'm going to go ahead and share my slide that I have for today, and then we're going to go through that. If you have any questions, of course, we'll go through questions at the end. Starting these streams always makes me a little bit fidgety, just because there's so much involved. So again, I thank you guys for your patience with me. Once I get into the groove, I'm feeling it, I'm good. But when I start the streams, I'm like, do I look here? Do I not? But whatever. So again, thanks guys for just being amazing and awesome. But here is my slides. So let's take a look at these slides here. So today we're going to be learning some life-changing habits when faced with that survival mode that we were dealing with, or that we have been dealing with for the last, several years, several months, whatever that is for you. We're going to talk about techniques on how to approach those things. So, like we were talking about yesterday, we went through kind of that stress wheel, right? We understand that there are different components of stress, and this might be you right now. It might be you just feeling like everything's super overwhelming in your mind, and you don't necessarily know how to even tackle or even understand where that stress is coming from, and that's okay. I did send this to you guys in an email, and I did want to emphasize there is no wrong or right way to fill this out. It's just, again, to help you understand where those stressors are coming from and whether or not we have control over those certain things. Sometimes there is no control and over those specific stressors, and we just have to know how to navigate that with things that are given controls in our lives. And I'm going to share that today as far as those given controls and how do we implement those into our lives to then improve everything else around us. So again, just to review, that environmental stress comes from things that are in our environments, whether we're being exposed to chemicals, we're in a dark office all day, we work in a lab, things like that. Things that we're involved in often, our work, our home, anywhere else that we go throughout the day, that's a stress that's added into our lives. Physical stress, again, injury, overtraining, illness, anything that has to do with your body and how it feels. Emotional stress is that anxiety, everything that's kind of going on in your heart, in your mind. That is something that also adds stress into our lives, right? Mental stress is the decision making, just feeling fatigued with information. I talked about how this comes from kind of social media when it involves our health and wellness journey, right? So we get a lot of information going on in our minds and we're overwhelmed, right? Then we have existential and social stress. So those are both things that I think are interconnected in some way, oftentimes. And so if we're having, say, relational issues, sometimes we even think, well, I mean, is there anyone out there for me? Is there a purpose for me in this world? And all of those stressors can kind of interplay, like we talked about. So with that said, we can control certain things, right? So we did talk about finding those controls. Do we have control over certain things? What do we think we have some control of? What are the things that we have no control of? And that was part of your assignment yesterday in that little graph. And I thought I did put that in here, but I guess I did not, which is crazy. But that's okay. So we can control 4 things in our lives. And these are major kind of macro things that we can control. So we can control mindfulness. We can control nourishment. We can control language. Language is something that we often don't think about, but it's actually a very, very critical point in how we approach the world and how we perceive the world. And we can also control movement. Most times, right? If we have that injury, that might be a little affected in some ways, but you can still move your body in different ways. So I am going to move on. Oh, look, there it is. I knew I put it in here. So yeah, like I said, this was part of your assignment yesterday, and it was about finding your stress sweet spot. So finding how you can control these things, total control, some control, no control. And that was from your stress wheel that you took some time to figure out where those stressors are coming from. Now, today we're going to talk about 2 components of the 4. So we did talk about, and I'm going to go back. So we did talk about mindfulness, nourishment, language, and movement. Today we're going to talk about the first 2, mindfulness and nourishment. So here we go. So many times we are taking on far too much. And so maybe it's time to start saying no in certain areas of your life. Maybe you're taking too much on at your job. That is actually not in your job description, but you're just such a hard worker and you have just such a great work ethic that you're like, sure. But the more that piles on, you're like, actually, I don't think I can handle this. And maybe even not acknowledging that, but now taking the moment to be mindful about the things that are going on in your life is the first step, right? So starting to say no in certain areas of your life so that you can start saying yes to yourself. A big thing that I tell my clients is that, hey, it's important to know that being selfish taking care of yourself is not necessarily selfish. It's not selfish. And self-care can look like so many things. A lot of times it's misinterpreted as, oh, I'm going to take a bath and have a bath soak and bath salts and have a facial and go get a massage. And while, yes, that's very, very important, and all of those things definitely can help you manage your stress, all of those things are surface level compared to the self-care that is truly monumental in your life and taking you out of survival mode. Those things are saying no, learning how to say no. Those things are also, making sure that we're nourishing our bodies, making sure that we're getting movement, all of these things that we were talking about, those 4 components, right? Mindfulness, movement, language, and nourishment. All those things are components that we need to start making sure that we're saying yes to 99% of the time. 1% maybe we're saying no to that because of other maybe things that fall higher on the hierarchy at that moment. But you should always be able to come back to that, because remember we were talking about the stress response, right? Those bad habits that we tend to see as self-sabotage are things that we're trying to implement into our lives because they're a quick fix, right? So if we're trying to do these quick fixes, we end up just in the cyclical motion of trying to fix that stress, but staying stressed, and fix that stress and staying stressed, right? So if we can shift our perspective and our language on how we approach our stress and our survival mode, that's where we're going to experience that success. So how do we do that? How do we start being more selfish in self-care and start saying no to things? And that's where I talk about this quite a bit with my clients, is that the only person that you should ever compare yourself to is the yesterday you. If we're in a place where we're in a survival mode, and we went over that yesterday of the criteria, if we're always fearful, if we feel anxious, if our appetite is inconsistent, if we're trying to lose weight and nothing's happening, if we're having a hard time sleeping. All of those things are indicators of that survival mode. And so oftentimes when we're in survival mode, we see other people on social media and we're saying, oh man, their life is just so beautiful and so good and they just have it together. And then we're feeling hopeless and helpless. And then we try to self-medicate, I guess we would say, or self-improve by those quick fixes, right? Mac and cheese for me, emotional eating for others, and that is emotional eating. Alcohol, drugs, other things in our lives that we kind of run to, even running away. Avoidance is a quick fix. I know a lot of people and a lot of my clients that we've worked together, avoidance has been something that is their quick fix. So instead of following through with action, they're like, nope, too hard, shut down. And that's a quick fix. But then what happens is that because you don't get anything done, because you're overwhelmed and you shut down, the time for that deadline, whatever had to be done, is now closer and closer and closer. And then you have to work under pressure, under severe pressure in order to make that deadline. Or you didn't make that deadline, so you are even more stressed, right? So finding those things in yourself and not comparing yourself to others. Because like I was saying, what happens when we're in survival mode is that we compare ourselves to these beautiful lives that we see on Instagram, on Facebook, on everything like that. But remember, those are highlights of everybody's lives, and everybody is struggling at some point. And so it's better to acknowledge that and to understand that, hey, we need to start being kind of inflective. We need to look within ourselves and compare ourselves to our yesterday us. So when we look at yesterday and we say, okay, yesterday was really crappy. I didn't necessarily focus on those 4 main components. I didn't really necessarily say yes to myself. I said no more times than I wanted to, right? So the biggest kind of challenge that I want you to start kind of implementing in your life is to aim to be 1% better than yesterday, your yesterday you. So what does that look like? If we're in a place that we want to start to improve our life, improve our health and our wellness, and create essentially the lifestyle of our dreams, how are we going to do that? Do we just kind of wish it, or do we just kind of start implementing 17 things all at once? No, not necessarily. If we look at one thing that we can improve, say, maybe I focus on one of the 4 components. Maybe I want to focus on being more mindful about what's stressing me out and what I have control of and how I can, improve on that, right? So that 1% better every day, and this is a concept that was kind of deemed by one of my favorite authors, James Clear, and this is in his book, Atomic Habits, and this was something that was like, mind-blowing for me. But that if you aim to be 1% better, 1.01 to the 365 point, if you multiply it by 365 days, that's 37.78% better than you were at the beginning of the year. If you're 1% worse every day for the year, that's 0.99 to the 365th place, right? And that's actually less than 0 by the end of the year, right? So to put that in perspective, it's like, if I aim to be 1% better, that just means that I make one more decision, one better, more beneficial decision today than I did yesterday. And I compare myself to my yesterday me, and not that friend I see on social media. And that's where we have to start. We have to start with, like we did yesterday, thinking about where those stressors are coming from. Because it's easy to be like, I'm stressed. It's too much. I can't handle it. Avoid, emotionally eat, run to something, right? But when we are able to identify those things, then be more mindful of those things, then we can aim to be 1% better just by one decision, one component even. of the system, right? One component of those 4 things that I was mentioning before. So how do we do that? So a lot of us are accustomed, maybe just from, culture, maybe from what we've been taught. A lot of us have been taught that, I need to have the motivation in order to do this action. So for those people that maybe are scared of starting a program with me, or say, I don't know, starting a program with school, oftentimes the biggest objection to starting something like that is, I'm not ready, or I'm not motivated enough. I'm going to wait until I have the motivation to do this. Now, the reality of this thinking is that it's quite inaccurate, actually. And actually, action is the thing that breeds motivation. So there has to be a balance, and this is something that I quite often talk about with my clients, is that there has to be a balance between a graceful voice of, hey, it's okay, I'm going to aim to be 1% better, and make one decision better than I did yesterday, or more beneficial choices than I did yesterday. And there also has to be a balance between, no, girl, you got to get at it right now. Because action is what is going to breed motivation, thanks to our pal dopamine. So dopamine is the chemical receptor, or the hormone that is responsible for our pleasure. It's what makes us happy when we achieve a goal. It's what makes us happy when, say, we set out to save a certain amount of money and we get to buy that good thing and we feel so happy and great. It's that same, happiness that we see when, we finally, for instance, if I'm aiming to lift heavier in my deadlift, it's that happiness that I feel when I achieve that. Now, it's not always going to be that great feeling all the time, but dopamine is still being released when we even just make these small choices. So, we learn behaviors because of dopamine. And we talked about how we've learned, say, these bad habits or things that we thought were sabotaging our success, right? Those are also learned habits. Those are also helping you release dopamine. For instance, again, if I had a stressful day and I want to emotionally eat, that's what makes my stressor feel shorter, is that release of dopamine. Okay, I feel okay. I had my mac and cheese. I feel better. But then again, that issue was never really resolved, right? So we have the ability to release dopamine and help our brain learn in different patterns, right? So for instance, if we want to be 1% better tomorrow or today than yesterday, right? We want to then be aware of, say, these triggers or these things that we were running to, for instance, that were creating this Band-Aid effect on our stressors. And we also want to be aware of that, but we also want to create a new pathway, a new dopamine pathway. I use this analogy a lot about a hiking trail, for instance. So say, for instance, we are an emotional eater, right? So for years and years, we have walked this hiking path that was probably very treacherous. And if we weren't careful, we would fall off the mountain, but we would continue to walk this treacherous path. But then now that we've created awareness about the treachery of this path, and that it's not actually the greatest view, and that it's actually not the most enjoyable hike. But we just heard about this new pathway that we can create, and it actually has more, beautiful scenes, and it's much safer for my ankles. I am infamously known to twist my ankles on hikes. So this is a non-ankle twister pathway that we can create, right? And so instead of emotionally eating, I'm now using movement as my new pathway, right? I'm using calling a friend as my new pathway. And the more that I follow through with this, so I'm going to say, let's, instead of emotionally eating this time, I'm going to call a friend. Did that make me feel better? Yeah, actually it did. So what that's going to do, and it actually, because it actually did make me feel better, I had that small little release of dopamine. And then what that does is create a kind of what am I trying to say? A need to do it again, essentially, to reinforce it. So next time we have a bad day and instead of emotionally eating and going to that behavior, we then realize, oh, I started making this new pathway. I'm going to call a friend. Did that make me feel better? Yeah, it actually did. And the more that we follow through with this new behavior, the more that new pathway is going to actually be a path, right? If you look at that dirt path and it's been traveled time and time again, it's going to be a very clear path. And over time, because of rain and because of everything else, that treacherous path is now going to be covered over. And that's what happens in your brain, is that the less you travel on that treacherous path, or say that bad habit, the more you're able to find new pathways. And that is exactly, like I said, what happens in your brain. Your brain, what that's called is neuroplasticity. And that's actually a very scientific thing that happens in neurogenesis. And your axons in your brain are connected like this. And they say emotional eating is the way to deal with stress. And then we start to create a new pathway, and all of these things start to, disconnect. And now we've created this new pathway over here, right? So action, all this to say is that action breeds motivation. So oftentimes we feel like we have to have the feeling in order to act, but that's not the case. We have to act in order to feel. So remember that it's not always that great big happiness feeling that we're expecting to feel right away. It's those little tiny thumbs ups along the way that are going to make the difference in your health journey. So if we're struggling to take action, if you're like, okay, I get this, it sounds great, it sounds like a great mindset to adopt, but Alyssa, I just really struggle with taking action. It's easy to say that. It's easy to say that I don't have to feel the motivation in order to act. But when it really comes down to it, I really don't know how to act. And that's okay. Again, having that balance between the graceful voice of it's okay, we just keep trying, right? And having that balance between that sergeant voice and finding the balance in between. So if we struggle to take action, the most helpful thing that has helped me in my journey and clients in their journey is to implement the 5-minute rule. And I'm sure you've heard this all over the place from multiple different, avenues. It's as easy as it sounds. Set your timer. Say, for instance, I am trying to move more. I'm trying to implement more movement. I'm going to set my timer for 5 minutes, and I'm going to walk outside my door, and I'm going to walk 5 minutes away from my house. Usually what happens is that I actually realize that wasn't so bad. Usually I'm like, oh, I can easily do like 20 more minutes or 10 more minutes if I really don't have the time. And sometimes the 5 minutes is hard and you're just not feeling it. So at least what happens if you only do the 5 minutes, if you walk away from your house and that 5-minute alarm goes off, then you get to walk back for 5 minutes. And guess what? You just did a 10-minute walk, right? Same thing goes for making a menu. You say, okay, I know that I succeed better with nutrition when I have a plan for the week. That way I'm not eating out or grabbing something on the run because I didn't have anything prepared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes, and I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to plan out my week for food options. So say for instance, I want 3 options for breakfast because I don't like eating the same things over and over. So I'm going to write down those 3 things. 3 things for lunch, 3 things for dinner. And now I know I have a general idea of what I need for grocery shopping, right? Grocery shopping is a little harder. You can't do that in 5 minutes, but generally it just takes 5 minutes to step into the grocery store. And then you're like, okay, I can handle this, right? So you can use this for any single thing in your life, right? So I definitely want you guys to implement this in your life. And this is all about that mindfulness segment, right? So we just covered that mindfulness segment. So in the comments here, I want you to give me maybe something that really resonated with you. Taking from this, little brief section of mindfulness, right? What are you going to take away from this? Are you going to aim to be 1% better? Are you going to do the 5-minute action rule? Are you going to just create awareness of those treacherous paths, those treacherous hiking paths that you have developed in your brain, and maybe start to develop a new one? I want to know in the comments which one or which concept is maybe something that's new to you, or maybe it's something that you've heard in a new way that you've decided, okay, I think I'm going to do this, or okay, this makes more sense. I'm curious to know, just so that I can help, best support you in these comments, because these comments are not just for you, and it's not just for you necessarily if you're worried about like, oh, I don't want attention on me, but it's helpful for me as a coach and getting to know you to, encourage you and to reach out to you about, hey, how's that 5-minute rule going? If that's what we wanted to implement, right? Okay, so I'm going to move into nourishment. So nourishment is a big thing that I focus on a day-to-day basis. I do a lot of nutritional counseling, and like we have talked about, that you follow me from Instagram, sad face, still no luck. But that if you came from Instagram, that I help people heal their relationship with food, particularly, and with their body, and I help them find the healthiest version of themselves without restrictive dieting. So that's the first thing that we're going to talk about, right? So when stress is high and we're in survival mode, it'll be tempting to want to repeat unproductive solutions. Like we talked about, some of these things that we have developed, say snacking on Cheez-Its, or say, for example, wheat thins are one of my clients' favorite things to reach towards, or chocolate or candy or whatever that is, for specifically with food. Stress is high, chocolate makes me feel good. Ooh, dopamine. Thank you. We're good. Instead of being able to kind of work through this and visit that first component of mindfulness, right? So mindful eating and intuitive eating is a very, very big part of my coaching programs. And this is something that takes practice, right? So it's not necessarily something that's fixed overnight. It can take, 3 months, 6 months. I've been working for people for years, and we're still, kind of integrating these techniques into their lives as well. So a big part of that is mindful eating. Now, there's 3 components to nourishment that are really, really important, that help mindful eating be successful. So the first thing is make sure you're eating enough. So many people, I will say like 99.98 of people and clients that I've worked with have told me that they're only eating around 1,200, maybe 1,300 calories. Can I tell you that that's for a 2-year-old? That is the requirement for a 2-year-old, and not for you and your body, and not for you and your hormones and your bodily mechanisms. And this is the reason why we're being put into survival mode, because you're not getting enough food and nourishment for, say, your muscles, your brain to work, to focus. You might feel like you're always foggy, that you're not really remembering things or critical things or your schedule, and you're kind of always just like, oh, why am I so flaky? It's probably because you're not eating enough. Also, why am I so tired? Why can't I sleep? You're probably not eating enough. So what I would do is I would make sure that, you check in with me and make sure that you're eating enough. I offer free macro profiles, calorie profiles for people that are wanting to be really specific about that. I definitely recommend tracking for a little bit. I'm not a big fan, and this is something that I work my clients out of. I'm not a big fan of tracking. And honestly, tracking should only be done, I'd say like a couple months, maybe 2 months in a year. The other thing is that a calorie deficit, so if weight loss is your goal, a calorie deficit should not be happening for years and years on end. It should really be happening, again, only 2, 3, maybe 4 months at max, and then you go back into your maintenance calories. The reason being is because if you're in a calorie deficit and you've been eating 1,200 calories for years and years and years, your body thinks, well, what the heck? You're not going to feed me. So I'm going to hold on to this energy because I need it to convert to energy because you're not feeding me energy. So I'm going to hold on to this extra fat so that when I need the energy, I'm going to be able to convert it, right? And then sometimes it's just so much in excess that it slows down your metabolism. It slows down your energy expenditure, which means that you're not motivated to move. Maybe that's where the lack of motivation is coming from as well. Understanding your macro balance is number 2. So understanding what the difference between protein, fat, and carbs are and why they're so important. I have so many people, again, coming to me saying, I'm doing keto, I'm doing this elimination diet, and it just hurts my heart quite a bit because carbs, protein, and fat are equally important. They all provide something that is very, very beneficial for your body to help you manage stress, to help you manage your survival mode, to help you get through life. Carbs are your brain food. They're energy. They're what you need to expend energy to go exercise and lift heavy. Protein helps with so many mechanisms. It's not just to build gains. It's to help you, build and repair bone. It's help you to produce hormones that are beneficial for your reproductive system, but also hormones aren't just for reproductive system. They are also, dopamine and serotonin and adrenaline and all of these other things that provide, very important, essential things to your life. Number 3 is focusing on what you can add, not what you must take out. A lot of people, when they're trying to, again, make more effort into being more healthful in their lives, they say, okay, no more bread, no more sugar, no more pasta, no more fun, essentially, no more enjoyment of life. And this is what makes things more difficult, less sustainable, less just all over happy. And this is why we end up finding ourselves in this cyclical pattern of dieting and trying again on Monday, trying to get back on the wagon, right? So if we instead focus on, okay, what can we add? Can we add more fiber? And that's generally where I start. Or maybe can we add more water? Water is 70% of our body or more even. And if we're not getting enough of that, we're going to feel pretty yucky as well. If we're just filling ourselves with soda and coffee and all of these things, water is not being accounted for. So maybe we start with water. Maybe we start with 80 ounces a day. How many of you? I want to know in the comments. I want to know if we are getting at least 80 ounces of water per day. If not, hey, now is the time for growth and to focus on that health, right? But focusing on the things that we can add, right? So we start with water, and then we start with fiber. Fiber is in veggies, it's in bread, it's in pasta, it's in rice, it's in so many things that we can enjoy. And then we start adding more veggies. So we go from 2 servings of veggies to 6 servings of veggies. And then over time, you've added so much that you have such a variety in your nutrition that you're not really necessarily thinking about, can I have pizza, pasta, bagel, and I don't know, cheesecake in the same day? Because you've added so much variety that you've actually started to enjoy those things and actually started to see the benefit of those things. That's the biggest thing. Again, that dopamine release, right? Making these decisions and seeing the effect from it is what creates those okay moments, right? Where it's like, okay, I do actually want to keep doing this because I see the benefit of this, right? And it does take time to make these changes, especially if it's like a quick thing, right? If it's like I'm used to getting chocolate and it was a quick thing, and when I ate my veggies, I didn't feel much better. I actually kind of felt fear. I had that fear of missing out. I had that FOMO, right? But you will notice over time that the more fiber, the more veggies, the more water, you're actually feeling way better than you did with just the chocolate quick dopamine release, right? So with that said, like I said, tracking is really only for the 2 months out of the year, if that even. Biggest thing that I focus on is portion sizing, hand portion methods, right? So I want you to take your palm, everybody look at your palm, and assess the size of that. That's the size of protein that you need in a meal. And it depends on who you are, your size, your activity level, things like that. But generally, you're going to need about 4 to 6 of these per day. So maybe 2 of these for lunch and 2 of these for dinner. We're good. We're at 4 at least, right? Veggies are going to be your fist. So if you can get a fist size of servings of broccoli or green beans or spinach or things like that, you're good on that protein, or you're good on that veggie portion size. Grains are a little funky. They're a cupped hand size. So say for instance, we're serving ourselves rice. This is a serving size. And so if we're getting pasta, if we're getting rice, couscous, whatever that is, the more starchy things, mashed potatoes, we're going to want to aim for that cupped hand. Thumb is your fat, so that's going to be your oils, your cheeses, your avocado, anything like that, and you're going to aim for 4 to 6 generally of all of these things. So again, creating awareness around what you're eating, this is the easiest way to do it, to use your palm size. So when you're, say, going for dinner, if you haven't eaten dinner yet, I haven't, I'm part of the No Dinner Club so far, but I'm going to eat after this. So when I'm serving my meal, I'm going to say, okay, how many, generally, you don't necessarily have to put it on your palm, but you can start by doing that just to create awareness, right? But you're going to say, how many palm sizes generally do I have on my plate? Do I have enough veggies? Do I have at least 2 servings of my fist size? Do I have maybe less than the entire bowl of rice, but maybe just like 2 or 3 servings of my cupped hand? How much oil did I use when I prepared my meal? Did I have, the entire pan sauced up, or could I have maybe brought it down a little bit, right? So just making these little decisions are what are going to increase that effectiveness of your nourishment, right? So last but not least, this is the biggest thing that I talk about with my clients every single day. Pay attention to how your body feels and you'll know what it needs. A lot of people cringe when they hear this because they're like, Alyssa, you have no idea. My body thinks it needs 10 pounds of chocolate a day or the entire box of Oreos a day. I promise you. If you allow yourself to have the entire box of Oreos in one day and say, how did that make me feel? Do I physically feel sick? Do I physically feel bloated, tired? Do I mentally feel, shameful, guilty, things like that? And then assess those feelings. Take those feelings to heart. Maybe write them down so that you're aware of how your body feels when you do that. Generally, we're eating the entire box of Oreos because it's something that we have created a pathway for, right? It's something that we have learned to console ourselves from, or, some kind of stressor that we're consoling ourselves from, right? So what you'll do is you'll actually assess that situation. I ate an entire box of Oreos. Do I feel better? Actually, no, I feel pretty crappy. Actually feel really guilty. Actually, don't feel like I can go to the bathroom for 4 days, So what you'll do is create awareness there and then try again tomorrow. And then say tomorrow you're going to say, okay, I ate the entire box of Oreos again. What's wrong with me? Why do I continue to do that? Take another time to assess how you're feeling. Do you feel crappy? Do you feel physically sick? Then maybe try again the next day. And maybe this time you only eat half of it. Reassess. Do you feel physically sick? Do you still feel bloated? And then what you'll realize is that by maybe the fourth day, you're actually I actually don't even need to eat this entire box of Oreos. I can have 2 and be satisfied and be good. And know that these Oreos are there in my pantry and that I can get them at any point. But I don't necessarily need it as a tool to console my feelings. But that's also the same thing with how your body feels with the things we continue to say yes to in our job. It also how our body feels when we're just overloaded with stress and then we decide to go to Orange Theory and just try to kick our own butt, right? And then we're feeling okay, that actually I didn't have enough energy for that and now I'm paying for it, So it's important to be mindful in every aspect of your life. That is, if there's anything that you can take from today or anything you can take from my coaching is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the biggest component, and slow down. That is why that's the first topic that I talked about today is mindfulness. Okay. So with that said, that kind of brings this to an end for our presentation today. And I love that I'm seeing these comments there in the chat, and I love that I see changing how I get my dopamine fix. Yes, yeah, exactly. So changing how I'm gonna get my dopamine fix is changing that hiking pathway, and but wanted to hear you. No worries. Don't worry about it. You can always watch the replay afterwards. And I want to adjust and find routines to increase water. Love it. Yes.